In the midst of the conversation on a German motorcycle with a sidecar captured in the last battle comes Tonkonoshenko. With difficulty pulling out his left leg, he rises, leaning with his hand on the fender of the sidecar. Having reported in detail about the received information, I asked, "Where will we cross the highway, Comrade Combat?" Having unfolded the map, Tonkonoshenko hesitated, then decisively poked his pencil at the point where the road passed through the forest. "No, here. If we meet German tanks, we will take cover in the swampy forest behind the road. The tanks won't get us there. We'll fight off the motorized infantry." We say goodbye to the depressed and silent collective farmers. We hear neither reproaches nor good wishes. But what can we do? If we had been ordered to stop at this village, we would have stood to the last, moving away. Okremenko turns around and shouts, "You do? We'll come back. We'll be back." And all of us wanted to ease our souls with such a hopeful promise. We firmly believed that we would come back. As soon as we left the village, we heard stomping ahead. Not reaching the head of the column, the horseman stops abruptly, apparently listening. "Who was it coming?" "Our own," I hear in reply. A few seconds later, a horseman stops in front of me. By the unsaddled horse and a German machine gun, I guess the Scout Lieutenant Akinbayev. He reported that the road was free and rode off to the commander. It's beginning to get light. We go quickly, not stopping in villages, trying not to look at the inhabitants, who silently, anxiously see us off. Women wipe their eyes with the tips of their handkerchiefs tied under their chins. It is not easy to navigate the country roads, even at night. The map shows one thin black thread, but if you go beyond the village outskirts, suddenly there are many branches as well travelled as the main road. Only the locals know where these branches lead. Our column also turned down one such branch before dawn, and when dawn broke, we bumped into the swamp, which in Smolensk region has no end and no edge. While I twisted the compass and mapped this way and that, Okremenko brought me a tall guy. "Fedya, I was surprised. How did you end up here?" I decided to make my way to Smolensk. Behind Fedya's back was a tightly stuffed canvas sack. He's a thrifty fellow, I thought. He had packed himself thoroughly for the journey. I was glad that Fedya knew well all the places around and could lead the company with his eyes closed, so I asked him to show the way. With the guide, we crossed the Rudnya-Ponizovi highway without any adventures. When after 3 or 4 kilometers came to the next one, from behind the turn suddenly jumped out 3 motorcyclists with sidecars, probably reconnaissance. Lieutenant Voronov, who was lying by the roadside with a group of soldiers, was not confused. None of their 6 shots were wasted. All the Nazis were killed dead, and our armament was replenished with automatic rifles and 3 rifles. Fedya took possession of one of the rifles. In the motorcycles we found a stock of ammunition and 3 dozen grenades with long wooden handles. The unexpected appearance of the motorcyclists alarmed. I gave the order to move away from the road and turning around camouflage. However, no one else appeared on the road. Having reported to the commander about the incident, we move on. Enterprising Voronov, having stacked ammunition and extracted weapons in the sidecar of one of the motorcycles, ineptly wiggled along an uneven forest clearing. We dragged the rest of the motorcycles and the dead into the forest, but the dashing lieutenant didn't gallop on his motorcycle for long. He couldn't brake in time in front of some ditch and flew into it. Fortunately, the nimble Voronov managed to jump off the saddle. When the soldiers pulled out the wrecked car, the lieutenant handed out the captured weapons, put 3 grenades in his belt and followed the soldiers. The July sun rose high above the horizon. We are standing at the edge of the forest. In front of us is a huge open field sown with rye or wheat. It is hard to make out from afar. Behind the field we can see huddled village buildings. Before moving on, it is necessary to find out whether it is possible to pass through this village by road. Lieutenant Akinbayev's scouts should answer this question. But where are they? Suddenly we heard a horse stomping. 2 soldiers on unsaddled horses appeared in front of us. They said that the commander was following them. Tonkonoshenko appeared from behind the turn, riding a gelding. The old saddle was badly battered. The stirrups were low down. The foot of the right leg is stuck in the stirrup. The left leg is freely lowered. Apparently, in some village, the commander exchanged the motorcycle for a horse, realizing that the motorcycle in the forest is not far away. While I was reporting the situation to the commander, riders appeared from the side of the village. We easily recognized our scouts. Entering the forest and seeing the commander, Lieutenant Akinbayev dashingly jumps off the horse, throwing the reins to a companion, leisurely approaches us and reports that there are no Germans in the villages, but on the highway Demidov-Rudnya moving armoured personnel carriers with motorised infantry. In one of the villages, Akinbayev's scouts met with a platoon of mounted reconnaissance sent by Colonel Birch. Having learned that the main forces of the combined detachment were concentrated in the forest northwest of the village, Akinbayev sought out Colonel Birch and reported to him about the location of the second column. The colonel demanded Captain Tonkonozhenko to himself. The captain galloped away, and our column settled down to rest in the forest. Having returned from the colonel, Tonkonozhenko reported that he had received orders to resume the march at 15 o'clock. Shortly before the performance of the company was joined by a squad that masked the withdrawal. The squad commander reported that, misled by periodic fire and rockets, fascists quietly waited for the morning, so the squad was able to freely leave the defense line and stealthily break away from the enemy. And here we are retreating again. The marching order is slightly changed. In the head of the column, commander put forward the first company. It is much easier and quieter to go in the middle of the column. Immediately felt that the weight of responsibility fell off my shoulders. Now you can relax. I walk ahead of the company, enjoy the silence, but not for long. I heard the rumble of a motor. I raise my head and see an old acquaintance, a two-tailed frame. Having missed the departure, the Germans are now looking for us. Tonkonozhenko expressed the fear that aviation reconnaissance, having informed his headquarters of the direction of movement of our forces, would help the mobile fascist units that had broken through to Demidov to reliably close the highway, which we would have to cross. Not an hour after the start of the movement, as the Junkers appeared, the forest sheltered us, but no matter how we applied to the terrain, losses could not be avoided. For the first time in this war, I had to endure a fierce bombing in the forest. The forest camouflages well from observation from the air, but to be in it during the bombing is much worse than in an open field. Giant trees fall from the bombs, splinters whistling, digging into the soft wood with a thud. Small trees seem to moan pitifully in pain, almost to the ground, bowing under the pressure of the blast wave. When I have to read about how fascist aviation with German scrupulousness periodically combed the forest partisan zone, I can easily imagine what the guerrillas experienced, caught by bombing away from safe shelters. Even our miners, who were good at hiding their fear, came out after the bombing on the forest road with their eyes dilated from the experience. Having received information from Akinbayeva about the ford across the river Rutavech, Tonkonozhenko quickly leads through it battalion and, carrying out order of Colonel Birch, provides crossing the main forces of the combined detachment. Now the combined detachment moved along one route, and Captain Tonkonozhenko's battalion was to follow in the rearguard. Apparently, in the course of pulling into a column, the battalion was delayed and too detached from the main forces. This, as far as I remember, was the beginning of all our further misfortunes. When we came to the highway leading from Demidov to Rudnya, we had to stop. A fierce ferry fight broke out ahead. Long bursts of machine guns were coming from the road, bullets whistling around, leaving the company. I ran in search of the commander. I found him in the forward chain together with the commander of the leading rifle company. I fall down next to him. Seeing me, Tonkonozhenko waved his hand in annoyance. We did not have time to skip. Motorized infantry saddled the highway. We must break through. Maybe we should wait until dark, timidly suggests the commander of the rifle company. You can't. The commander shakes his head tiredly. We have already fallen behind the main forces. In addition, may catch up with the pursuing units, and we will be in a mouse trap. Before this happens, we must break through. 2 45mm guns Tonkonozhenko decided to put on the flanks, both 76mm guns, in the center of the combat order. Here also loaded horses, a supply platoon with ammunition, and a medical station with the wounded. Gathering the commanders, Tonkonozhenko announces their decision to break through a wide front, deploying all companies in a line. My company was to move to the left flank. As soon as the motorized infantry will be knocked off the road, the company, together with the battalion cannon, should take the defense front to the north to protect the main forces from possible attacks from Demidov. Having brought the company to the line assigned to it, I impatiently await the signal of attack. Finally, a shot from a 76mm gun rang out from the right. After the third shot, I jump up and, shouting, "Follow me, run to the road. I don't look back, but with the corner of my eye I noticed that Stadnyuk and Voronov jumped up almost simultaneously. Branches knocked down by bullets rained down from above. Someone yelped, someone shrieked. But the stomping behind my back intensifies. I run like in a competition, trying to beat the seconds. And yet just before the roadside ditch, Voronov overtakes me. With the cry of "Beat the fascists," he rushed across the highway and fell on the machine gunner with the whole weight of his wiry body. The soldiers silently jumped over the ditch. Lieutenant Spirin, who was running after him, jumped over the deep ditch and with an accurate shot killed a big fascist who swung his bayonet at Voronov's back. And at the same moment his lean, tall figure, as if tripping over an invisible obstacle, lay flat at the feet of the Nazi he had killed. On the left side of his uniform a red stain was spreading on his back. I lifted the lieutenant and in the very center of the breast pocket saw entry bullet hole. Ran up Petrenko gently took in his hands the lieutenant, and I rushed along the road to see what danger threatened us from the side of Demidov. Having lost hope of stopping the attackers, the fascists ran toward the woods. Voronov and his men pursue them, and before me the task to hold the repulsed section of the highway. Together with Stadnyuk, we set up the fighters and order them to dig in faster. Meanwhile, the rest of the battalion crossed the road, carried the wounded, transferred the loaded horses. When the regimental guns began to roll, from the north on the highway appeared a tank and 3 armoured personnel carriers with infantry. The commander of a well-camouflaged 45mm gun is not in a hurry, waiting for the tank to put the side armour under the That is why the artilleryman chose a position slightly ahead to the right of the road. When the armoured personnel carriers came closer, it was the turn of the fighters armed with bundles of grenades and bottles with a flammable mixture. And at this critical moment I saw Stadnyuk running along the road, holding a bottle in his right hand. When the tank got close to him, the politruk brought the bottle above his head and at the same moment fell on his back. The tank was getting closer. When it was about 50 meters away, the anti-tank gun was fired. The tank swerved to the side and fell into the ditch. Armoured personnel carriers braked sharply. Infantrymen, falling out from behind the sides like cockroaches, scattered to the sides and opened fire. I ran up to Stadnyuk. He lies with his eyes open, leaning aside a clenched fist. His head is shot just below the temple. I pick up his body and, ducking, carry it to the shade of a large fir tree. The armoured personnel carriers, having retreated, pour machine gun fire on the road, preventing the rest of our units from jumping over it. With 5 accurate shots, the artillerymen silenced 2 armoured personnel carriers. The third, covered by the padded vehicles, continued firing along the highway. Lieutenant Voronov's men, who had returned to the company, helped the artillerymen drag their light cannon between the trees. From this convenient position, the artillerymen destroyed the 3rd armoured personnel carrier. The armoured personnel carriers that had been hit barricaded the road. It was favourable for us. The motorized infantry twice tried to attack, but each time the accurate fire put it on the ground. Movement across the road resumed. Finally, a horseman came riding from the commander and passed me the order to withdraw along the route indicated earlier. Lieutenant Voronov and his men helped the artillerymen to drag the cannon. We fought. Mighty Okremenko carefully carries the body of Ivan Afanasyevich, and the soldiers, uncloaked tents, mortally wounded Lieutenant Spirin and soldiers wounded in the legs. We are walking with our heads down. Even Vasil Soroshtin doesn't take his eyes off his soiled boots. I probably don't look any better. Confusion was overwhelming me. My sense of self-preservation told me to get out of the dangerous area as quickly as possible, where our pursuers could intercept us at any moment. What to do with the wounded? I'm still waiting for a miracle. If Okremenko will say that Ivan Afanasyevich is not killed, but only I cannot accept the idea that this wise and soulful my comrade in arms, who supported me in the most difficult moments, will never smile, will not say, "Well, Sasha, despondent, don't be sorry. We, communists, do not need to lose heart. I make a decision to pay my last respects to my battle friend, even if the fascists rush now to attack. Comrades Manton and Naus, comrades, we can't leave the body of our dear Ivan Afanasyevich to the fascists. I propose to bury him here under this mighty pine tree." "That's right, comrade Komrati," Okremenko responds. "Let's bury our dear comrade political officer according to all the rules." And having carefully lowered Stadnyuk's body on the cloak tent spread out by Fedya, he took out a sapper spade and began to trace the contours of the grave vigorously. The fighters rushed to help him. I pulled out of Ivan Afanasyevich's breast pocket his party ticket and carefully wrapped it in a Kleenex together with my own. Okremenko swaddled Stadimuk's body in a cloak tent, raised it high in front of him and slowly, solemnly walked toward the grave. Everyone with uncovered heads followed him. At the edge of the grave, Okremenko stopped. Voronov and I took Stadniuk's body from his hands. Jumping to the bottom of the grave, Okremenko gently lowered him to the sandy bottom. After waiting for the petty officer to go upstairs, I farewell, our dear comrade, our combat friend and mentor. You honourably, as befits a communist, fulfilled your duty to the motherland. Forgive us for not bidding you farewell with salutes. We will fire these salvos at our enemies. We'll avenge you on the fascists. We swear, came Voronov's metallic voice. We swear, all those present repeated after him in unison. Fortunately, the fascists had no time to discover us and prevent us from seeing Ivan Afanasyevich off to his final resting place. We were ready to move when the first shots of our guard were heard. Fierce firing broke out at once. Bullets whistled around. As I listened, I realized that they were firing from 3 directions. Only from the side of the highway was quiet. Apparently, the fascists decided to push us back to the highway and destroy us in the open. I'm ordering us to take a circular defense. Hiding behind the trees, we fired at the attacking fascists. Suddenly, overlapping the shots, Voronov's sharp voice rang through the forest. Notisent, comrades, for our political commander, for our comrades in the fascists. Zalpum pli, botchapum pli, zapoma. The heavy fire forced the Nazis to retreat. Convinced that we are trapped, they waited. It was not difficult to guess that the main forces of the attackers are attacking from the east, from the forest, through which passes our way to their own, and from the north and south single machine gunners, camouflaged in the shrubbery, trying to make more noise. Realizing this, I run over to the tree behind which Sergei Voronov was hiding. Seeing me, he casts a questioning look. We need to drive the machine gunners away. He pointed to the south. Take Lysov, Brashenko and Act. We'll follow you. Nodding, Voronov promptly ran over to Lysov. Then they together with Brashenko hide in the thick shrubbery. While Voronov's group was infiltrating in the rear of the machine gunners, the fascists launched a new attack. We responded with calculated single shots. Having made sure that we were in place, the Nazis quieted down. There were closer machine gun bursts. I realized that Voronov's group began to act. Having set the task to Senior Sergeant Polivoda, who with a group of mortars was to cover our maneuver, I, with artillerymen and soldiers carrying wounded, cautiously moving south. Passing 2 kilometers, I turn sharply to the east, and soon our detachment deepens into the swampy forest. Now the swamp is the main danger. However, this time Fedia helps us out as well, as he easily avoided the ruinous areas according to the signs known to him. On the way, Petrenko approached me and whispered in my ear, Lieutenant Spirin died. We make the first halt. We clarify our forces. We are left 25 people. With tenderness I consider mred and tested comrades, cold-blooded and silent Voronov, stern and adamant Partoglisovy, cheerful Seroshtan, on whose body there seemed to be no place not hit by a bullet or a splinter, staid and imperturbable Polivoda, Brashenko, still troublesome Oremenko, Petrenko, Vostrikov, Shlevko, hilarious Susik with an invariable telephone set on his side. Sensible not by age, Fedya tries to hide behind Okremenko's back. And my orderly Misha Stogov, because of a deep abrasion in the whole back, has to keep his duffel bag and weapons in his hands all the time. From the former rifle company survived a group of fighters, headed by a Bogatyrsgogo-felded Sergeant Sokolov. Of them 2 are severely wounded in the legs. They are silently lying on tents. A caring Petrenko is tending to them. A few steps away lies the body of Sergeant Sokolov, and several soldiers dug a shallow grave, which immediately filled with water. Everyone silently crowded around it, bowing their heads low. Sergeant Sokolov carefully corrected the cloak tent, which wrapped the body of the lieutenant, sadly looked at the soldiers of the rifle company. From our 3rd rifle company, there are 9 men left alive, he said in a quiet, sad voice. Today we say goodbye to Lieutenant Spirin. He is the only son of his mother. And let whoever remains alive among us inform her of the fate of her son. I have her address. Turning his face to the dead, the sergeant quickly brushed away a tear with a deep heartiness, adding, Goodbye, our dear commander. May the Smolensk earth be at your rest. After the funeral, Sergeant Sokolov scratched with a bayonet rank, surname, name and patronymic of the dead lieutenant and his helmet, and carefully put it at the headboard of the grave. Our composite company was now replenished with 3 steadfast artillerymen. With interest, I look at the variegated armament of the soldiers. Some of them, in addition to rifles, have trophy automatic rifles, which is very useful. We got a lot of trophy ammunition. However, there are only 2 shells for the anti-tank gun, but the gunners will not abandon their 40-50, even if they have to carry it on their hands. After all, we are in a hurry to Smolensk, and there is a great need for anti-tank artillery. Seroshtin and Brashenko, besides small arms, took a heavy mortar barrel with a tripod. The soldier who dragged the base plate was killed in the firefight. To the great joy of Seroshtin, the artilleryman, having seen the suffering of the mortarmen, tied the mortar barrel to the cannon bed. Having chosen a place drier and leaning against the trunks of mighty spruce trees, the soldiers took out of their sacks breadcrumbs and German canned food and reluctantly began to eat. Had it not been for my orders, they would not have touched the food. They were Voronov and I are also sitting over an open can of canned food and swallowing with difficulty the pieces of stew melted by the July heat. It was not only fatigue that deprived us of appetite. The tragedy of the situation was depressing. I thought, every day we lose comrades. Now we miraculously broke through the enemy barrier. People are exhausted. And what's next? Where to go? Where to look for our battalion? What's the situation in the Smolensk area? We're walking like blind men. There's a lot to despair about. My miners are turned holding up well, but on the faces of some soldiers from the rifle company is written despair. My thoughts are interrupted by Lieutenant Voronov. In what direction shall we go further, Commander? Judging by the names of settlements, which Captain Tonkonzenko pointed out to me for orientation, I answered, looking at the last sheet of the map. Our battalion should follow north of the Vitebsk Highway to Smolensk, so we can't deviate from this route if we don't want to lose hope of catching up with our own. And what if ours come out on the Vitebsk Highway? They won't, which I confidently objected. Combat warned us not to turn off on the highway. I see, agreed Voronov. So we'll stick to the next route. Voronov listed 5 or 6 villages and exclaimed with annoyance, "This is where my map stops. What points will we go through next?" Neither, we will choose a route based on the situation. We should talk to people before the performance, suddenly suggested Voronov. Yes, I agreed, We should tell them. No sooner had I finished my thought than excited exclamations were heard from Sergeant Sokolov's group. What to expect, Comrade Sergeant? I heard a thin voice rattling with resentment. The fascists almost nailed us here while we were doing the funeral. It'll be even worse from now on. The Germans, they say, are already approaching Moscow. Who told you that? Roared the indignant Sokolov. I'll tear out my fucking tongue for such nonsense. Tell me? Yes, they say the tall, thin fighter squeaked uncertainly in a thin voice. Saying you're at, Sokolov burst indignantly. They say chickens are milked in Moscow. For crying out loud, let's go to the lieutenant. Sokolov grabbed the stubborn fighter by the collar and dragged him like a parent to a guilty son. What's the matter, Comrade Sergeant? I hurried to meet him. What happened? Yes, Comrade Lieutenant. Sokolov released the collar of the soldier's uniform and pointed his finger at the offender, the soldier Nakalkin. Not Nakalkin, but Makalkin. Well, Makalkin. Sokolov got angry. So this Makalkits persuaded some of them to separate from the squad and make their way on their own. Traitor. The sergeant glared at him threateningly. And I'm not a traitor. Makalkin's squeaky voice rang out on the highest note. I didn't persuade you to go to the Germans, but to our own. Why do you want to separate from the detachment? Makalkin glared at me and squeaked angrily. Because such a bunch of stealthily slip to their own will not be possible. Again, we will be nailed somewhere, but singly or 2 or 3 people we will slip through invisibly. Listening to the fighter, I was convinced of the timeliness of Voronov's proposal to talk to people. I was not worried about my miners. They could not be dragged away from each other by force, although a heart-to-heart talk would not be superfluous for them. But for the new fighters whom I knew little, such a conversation was extremely necessary. Not all of them, as it seems. I have won the trust. Some of them, apparently, were not sure that we young lieutenants would be able to lead them to their own. Having commanded everyone to come to me, I said, "Moo, comrades." Now fighter Makalkin admitted that he would like to break away from the detachment and sneak to their own alone or two or three. "Near is a hero," Serashtan exclaimed in surprise. "Yes," I confirmed, "there is one among us. I must warn you that we represent a military unit of the Red Army, and I am your commander. As in any military unit, failure to comply with the order of the commander is a violation of the military oath. In other words, a crime. The special situation in which we find ourselves gives me the right to take any measures to suppress the crime, up to and including execution." I asked the soldier Makalkin to take this clarification into account. However, all this I said in the order of information for those who still do not know well the laws of wartime. The main thing is that it is more difficult to get to our own men alone. Any fascist patrol can intercept them, and we, the commanders, know the route better than any of you. And don't panic, comrades, as Makalkin does. We are on our own land, so we will boldly go on it. And if the fascists try to stop us, we will beat them, as we have beaten them so far, despite their numerical superiority. After all, we are fighters of the Red Army. I noted with pleasure how by the end of my excited address to the soldiers their shoulders straightened, their faces became clearer, and in their gazes there was an unyielding determination. "That's right, Comrade Lieutenant." The first to respond was Lissov. "We are in our own land. We will beat the fascists wherever they are, in front of us or behind us. And the main thing is that we will continue to attack the enemy shoulder to shoulder. That's our strength. Am I right?" "Right, Mikhail Andreyevich. Right." Amicably supported the mortars. "Do we agree with the party leader?" Sergeant Sokolov chimed in with the approving roar of the rifleman. "And you, Soldier Makalkin, what do you say?" I asked ironically, approaching him. "What about me?" Without raising his eyes, squeaked Makalkin. "I'm like everyone else." For a moment he raised his eyes, but he couldn't stand it and lowered his head again. "Then on the road, comrades," I announced. "Lieutenant Voronov, line up the men in columns of 2. The cannon in the middle of the column, to help the artillerymen to allocate 6 of the strongest fighters." When Voronov has determined the order of proceeding, I ordered him to select 3 men and together with them to go 300 meters ahead. We followed a barely visible forest path. I expected to get away from the highway before dark, in the area of which appeared large enemy forces. When it was impossible to distinguish anything under our feet, we stopped at the edge of a forest clearing to rest. During the overnight stay, Fedya, who managed to collect on the way Summer Podberezoviki and Wawishki, treated us to a mushroom shashlik and gave us each a small piece of lard, which he had brought from home. German rifle behind his back, another in his hands behind a wide leather belt, which he took off the Nazi officer, sticking out long wooden handles of German grenades, canvas bag full of ammunition. Household kid likes Petty Officer Okremenko. He claps him approvingly on his cool shoulder, and every time assures him that as soon as they reach their unit, he will ask the regimental commander to assign Fedya to our company. Fedya is obviously pleased with this prospect. Only Misha Stokov jealously squints at him. On the march, Fedya is always trying to stay close to me. July nights are short. At 3 o'clock it is light even in the forest, and at 4 we continue our way. In front with 3 fighters is the tireless Sergei Voronov. The second day of our wanderings through the forest and swamps of Smolensk was coming to an end. By evening we entered the spruce forest. We were surrounded by tall, mighty spruces, and although it was not late, it was already dark under their mighty crowns. I looked for a place to sleep and decided to send Okremenko and his men to the nearest village for food. At last the trees seemed to split apart and a gap appeared. We came to a clearing, on the edge of which we intended to camp. Suddenly a figure flashed in the gap. Voronov was running towards us. "Comrade Komrati, Germans," he whispers in our ear. There in the clearing, I'm signaling danger. The men froze. Having quietly passed the command to disguise ourselves, Voronov and I cautiously crawl to the edge of the forest. The men who were on patrol are lying under the bushes without moving. It is still relatively light, so I can see German soldiers scurrying around the clearing. At first, I can't understand why the fascists are stacking brushwood in piles. Then I realized from the arrangement of the piles and from the fact that these piles are watered with some liquid from canisters, that at night they will turn into bonfires. So the fascists are preparing a small forest airfield. Where are the Germans here? It became clear when Voronov silently showed me the parachute dome. clearly white on the dark green pine of the nearest spruce. The head group of the paratroopers, I decided. My first thought was to get away from here immediately, to dodge the fight. After all, we must get to Smolensk sooner. And immediately I was ashamed of my attempts to find an excuse for wanting to avoid battle. What shall we do, Lieutenant? I asked Voronov quietly. Attack, he decisively chopped and added, pointing at the prepared fires. We'll destroy them before the reinforcements arrive. Yes, we'll attack, I confirm. And immediately. It is most convenient to get close to the fascists over there where the shrubbery angles out into the clearing. We'll take all the fascists in the crosshairs, open fire on them, and finish off the survivors in hand-to-hand combat. Voronov liked the plan. Split into 6 groups, without a single Russell took the designated places. We with Voronov and the men of our group got close to the Nazis, almost 60 meters. You can even see every feature on the face of the observer. One can see that the July heat had soaked him, and the calmly past day had lulled him to sleep. He was either thinking about something or dozing. I signal Voronov. Having caught on sight the officer in charge of the works, I shoot. He falls like a felled tree. The shot serves as a signal for the others. Soon it was all over. Unfortunately, this fight, which ended happily for us, was not without losses. 1 soldier from Sergeant Sokolov's group was killed. We hastily buried the killed, replenished ammunition at the expense of trophies. Having taken canned meat and non-stale German bread in a package, we leave the clearing. Making up for lost time, we speed up our pace. The soldiers carrying the wounded are changing more and more often. Not even 2 hours have passed, as from behind we heard excited shouts. Fascists. An alarming thought flashes through my mind. I rush back and see an incomprehensible picture. Okrymenko's mighty hands gently support the fighter, and Petrenko feels his pulse. I ask what happened. The petty officer, raising his head, shrugs his shoulders perplexedly. A fainting comrade, Lieutenant, Petrenko explains, that's all. And after a moment's silence, he adds, the fighter is exhausted. The words of the orderly told me that the tired, hungry soldiers had reached the limit of their strength. It became clear why they began to stumble more often. We had to call a halt. Okrymenko, with the help of Fedya, quickly lit a fire, having scooped water from the nearest forest ditch. The soldiers placed their wokes around the brightly burning fire, but without waiting for boiling water, fell asleep. Only Voronov, Okrymenko, Misha Stogov, Fedya, and, to my great surprise, Suzik were still on their feet. Suzik was shuffling his feet, supporting the thin end of a dried birch tree, which Fedya was dragging to the fire, chasing off insolent mosquitoes from his face. Koma leaves dirty streaks on his forehead and cheeks, which makes his chubby-cheeked face with bulging bright eyes involuntarily evoke a smile. Noticing that the water in the cauldrons is already boiling, Okrymenko waves his hand. Enough, boys. Are you going to winter here? Fedya, having opened a can of canned meat and taken some groats out of the bag, began to cook soup. Koma, lying down beside him, stirred the soup with a wooden spoon in the cauldron for a minute, and then stuck his face into the ground, not letting the spoon out of his hand. Okrymenko gently lifted Suzik and carried him under the nearest bush. Having satisfied their hunger, Okrymenko and Voronov fell asleep. Misha and I are awake. The petty officer snores so deafeningly that we have to turn him from side to side. Then Stogov and I had a chance to sleep for a whole hour. Opening my eyes, I see the soldiers huddled around the fire. They greedily devour the chowder cooked by Fedya. This is the first hot meal for the last few days, so I am not surprised by the diligence with which the soldiers scrape the wok. The sun just appeared from behind the horizon, and our small detachment has already continued to move eastward. We are going through the area, which is not marked on the map I have. We kept our direction by compass. Suddenly the forest ended, and the floodplain of some river, overgrown with tall grass, already beginning to wither, opened to our eyes. The soldiers, having dropped their helmets and forgetting about the danger, dipped their heated heads into the cool coastal water, washed off the dried dust and sweat from their faces. The Oka is wide and deep, and in the squad, as it turned out, almost half of the fighters cannot swim. It is necessary to find a way out of the situation. People come to the shore in groups and singly. Many fighters and commanders, as well as refugees with bags and knots, have gathered here. Different people, different faces, but on all the expression of endless fatigue and sadness. A grey patina of dust testifies to a long and bitter journey. Some sit or lie on the grass, others hesitatingly walk nervously along the shore. Some, having tied their uniforms with a belt and thrown their rifles behind their backs, swam to the opposite shore. Not far from me was a swarthy, black-haired senior lieutenant with artillery insignia in his buttonholes. Seeing a map in his hands, I approach him. The artilleryman is half lying on the grass, leaning on his arm bent at the elbow. His cap with a black eye patch is thrown near him. Identifying myself, I suggest to the senior lieutenant to cross the river together. Hearing my voice, the artilleryman looked me in the face, and in his eyes I read immense fatigue and indifference. Realizing that he did not hear my words, I repeat the sentence. "I can't, comrade. I can't swim." The artilleryman replies and looks at the map lying on the grass with apparent indifference. I lean over it with curiosity. From north to south, there is a blue thread of the river that blocked our way. I look carefully into the blue winding thread, and with joy I find upstream the conventional designation of the bridge, where we can cross to the other side. And the main thing is that right after the crossing we will get into a huge mass of swampy forest, in which the meeting with the Nazis is almost excluded. Loudly and distinctly pronouncing each word, I offer the artilleryman my version of the crossing. He visibly revives. The irregular, sharp features of his swarthy face light up with a semblance of a smile. "We can try it, Lieutenant." The artilleryman rises from the ground with difficulty, and for the first time scrutinizes me with feverishly sparkling brown eyes. "Are you not wounded?" I was worried. "No." He waved his hand tiredly. "I was covered with earth, so I can't hear very well." Whether because of hearing, or from unwillingness to continue the conversation, artilleryman turns away from me and, limping, goes to the water. Not wanting to bother him, I order Voronov to build people. In an hour or so, we come to the place where the bridge was marked on the map. However, instead of it, we find burnt wooden piles. This is alarming. Lieutenant Voronov volunteered with Siroshtin to go on a reconnaissance. Knowing that Siroshtin's body, as they call it, has no life on it, I suggest that Voronov take someone else with him. Vasil Siroshtin, squinting his brown eyes beneath the bright rays of the sun, assures me that he is perfectly healthy, and in proof of this he twists his head so vigorously that the bandage around his neck has loosened and dropped, exposing the inflamed wound. "Stop it, Siroshtin." I strictly cut off and ordered Petrenko immediately change the bandage on the neck, Sergeant. In the reconnaissance together with Voronov, Brashenko and Fedya, whose civilian clothes were very useful. Sneaking under the bridge from pillar to pillar, the scouts safely crossed the river and crawled along the opposite slope. They scrutinized something for a few minutes, then moved toward the village. About 40 languid minutes passed. At last Voronov appeared. Having swum back, the lieutenant with unusual for him excitement reports on the results of the sortie. On that bank the scouts came across the corpses of 18 Red Army soldiers, then visited the village, hastily abandoned by the locals. Brashenko and Fedya in the village looking for boats. Soon Brashenko and Fedya appear, accompanied by a local resident, a very old man. He comes down to the river and shows his hand. Fedya, without undressing, jumps into the water and, diving in, pulls out an iron chain. Grasping it, he pulls the flooded flatboat to the shore. Brashenko rushes to his aid. Having pulled up to the shore, they overturn the boat, pouring out the water. Fedya brings a long pole and, deftly wielding it, directs the boat to the Pasha side. Together with Voronov and Okremenko, we get into the boat and cross to the opposite shore. I cordially greet the ancient old man who answers every question only after a threefold. I order Okremenko to transport the wounded and the contused senior lieutenant first of all. I asked the old man how the Red Army men died. It turns out that they were shot by fascist saboteurs, which in recent days a lot of dropped from airplanes. Hearing the shooting, the locals hid in the woods. Carpenters' axes were lying on the site of the tragedy. Apparently, the sappers were restoring the destroyed bridge when they were suddenly attacked by saboteurs and shot at point-blank range. Passionate about their work, the soldiers did not even have time to grab their rifles, which were standing nearby, drawn up in goats. Turning to the crossing, I see a picture that makes me smile. Fedya long pole pushes the boat, and Okremenko kneeling, holding in his powerful hands like a coachman reins the ends numerous soldiers' wraps, which frantically clung to the soldiers who cannot swim. The first to catch my eye is a puny Suzik, hanging on the winding like a gudgeon on a hook. With their eyes bulging with fear, the fighters pull themselves up, and, losing their footing, fall face first into the water. However, they do not let go of the wrappings from their hands. Okremenko, blushing from exertion, drives Fedya, never ceasing to encourage the swimmer. Hold on, eagles. The shore is close. And the eagles, swallowing the turbulent water, are slowly moving towards the saving land. I sigh with relief when Okremenko carries the last almost suffocated eagles to the shore, holding them under his arms, and Petrenko is already working on them, trying to bring them, as he liked to put it, in a combat-ready state. The main difficulty arose during the crossing of the Fortikapiatka. It was impossible to transport it by boat, and it was impossible to abandon it. The gun commander and I were standing on the shore, not knowing what to do. Suddenly my glance slipped on a coil of telephone cable, which persistently dragged Homer Suzak. What if we dragged the cannon along the bottom? The artillerymen quickly uncoiled the cable and wove 2 cables from it. Having ferried the horses into the swim, the gun commander carefully fastens the cables to the axles and to the horse harness. When the ropes were hooked, all the soldiers who were on their feet, helping the horses, pulled them. The cannon slowly crawled along the bottom. I sighed with relief when more than half of the trail was behind me. It turned out to be too soon to calm down. The ropes were taut as strings, horses and men strained with all their might, but it was as if the cannon was stuck in place. After several unsuccessful attempts to move it, the gun commander, a stocky, stout man, resolutely threw off his uniform and swam to the place where the cannon was stuck. Having taken air into his lungs, he dives then, noisily sniffing off. The wheels have rolled into the hole. Push! And dives again. Having whipped the horses, we pull together, but the cannon still does not move. The artilleryman's head appeared above the water again. He lies down on his back and rests for 2 minutes. Silently, I looked around at the soldiers standing around. 3, including Okremenko, as if guessing my wish, quickly undressed and swam to help the artilleryman. At my signal, all 4 of them dive, and we, grasping the ropes, mercilessly whip the horses. Nahura-pa resounded along the river when the damned cannon finally moved from the place and crawled to the shore. And as if in response to our cries, machine gun bursts from the edge of the forest nearest to us. 1 horse falls. Someone grabs an axe and cuts the harness. The cannon, pulled to the shore, is dragged over the hillock, and the stripped and half-dressed Red Army men grab their weapons and scatter along the shore, trying to find at least some shelter from the bullets. Voronov cat-like lands next to me. Germans, comrade ye, he reports, suddenly jumped out of the forest. We dropped on them with machine guns. Lie down for now, gather their strength probably. On my question about the number of fascists, Voronov shrugs his shoulders. I'm looking around. Closest to us is the edge of the forest from where we were shelled. To the right is an open flat field sown with clover. The road crossing it reaches the far edge of the forest. We intended to follow it further. However, under the enemy fire, it is impossible. Having consulted, we decided first of all to drive away the fascists deep into the forest. After waiting for the soldiers to dress and collect equipment and ammunition, we run over to the edge of the forest. Artillerymen fired the last shells. When there were about 200 meters left to the edge of the forest, the fire began to subside. Bullets flew from somewhere from the depths. It was indiscriminate, aimless firing. Having thrown back the fascists, we decided to move to the opposite edge of the forest. Having remembered that the map showed this forest to be heavily swamped, I consulted an old man who stayed near the wounded during the shooting, where it would be easier to cross it. Understanding my question, the old man shook his head. You can't go through this forest, my men. It's a ruinous place. You'll get lost and be lost. What to do, grandfather? The old man remained silent for a long time, moving his lips. Thinking that he did not hear, I repeat the question louder. There is confusion in my voice. Raising his light-coloured, as if faded eyes at me, the old man suddenly declares, I'll show you out. I've known this forest since I was a little boy. I look at the bent figure of the old man with doubt. Will he be able to walk 10 kilometers along the forest paths? After all, it is still necessary to return. The old man seemed to have guessed my hesitation. Leaning on a thick stick, bent in the form of a horn, grunting, he slowly got up from the ground and, crossing himself, suddenly walked briskly along the road, throwing on the Let's move, my man, with God. Under cover of a group of fighters, led by Voronov, our little detachment follows the old man. To my surprise, there was no shell-shocked artilleryman among us. It turns out that the senior lieutenant, as soon as the shelling stopped, without waiting for the others, went to the forest. The detachment, they say, will catch up. The detachment safely entered the forest. Okremenko and Fedya try to support the old man under his arms, but he resolutely rejects their help. Hunched over, he paces measuredly along the forest path. An hour and another passes, but we did not find the artilleryman, so our paths missed each other in this forest. Only when we got far into the forest, I began to realize the danger that awaited us. We walk on barely visible paths. More and more often there are swampy areas in which, not knowing the forest, do not determine the right direction, especially hard to have a gun. In places we are forced to carry it on our hands. If we crossed this forest and swamp wilderness without a guide, probably would be confused. At last the ground under our feet becomes firmer. The forests and flowery glades begin. The old man stops, sits down on a high bump and, crossing himself, announces, "Well, dear man, thank God. The swamp is over. Now you're safe. Go with God and I'll rest a little and go back." We're making a halt. Petrenko is examining the wounded. Okremenko and Fedya quickly build a fire. Having boiled soup, everyone greedily pounces on the food. I put the kettle near the old man and offer to eat. The old man looks incredulously at the aluminum spoon and shakes his head negatively. "You can boil your lips." Okremenko brings a wooden one. Having looked at it approvingly, the old man slowly scoops the spoon from the kettle and carefully tastes the soup with his lips. It seemed hot to him. Putting the spoon aside, the old man waits for it to cool down. Out of politeness, I follow his example. The conversation between us does not go well. I have to shout every word. So, I, my dear man, was a soldier too. It was a long time ago when we fought with the Turks in the Balkans. In the Balkans. I try to correct him. What? In the Balkans, Grandpa, in the Balkans. I shout. That's right, my man, that's what you say. In the Balkans. The old man nods approvingly. We crossed a huge river there, not like you, dear man, today. There were Turks on that bank, and there we were. The Turks shoot and we swim. A lot of our brother went to the bottom to feed the crayfish. God rest their souls. The old man is baptized. But no matter how the Turk raged, we sailed to this shore. The Turk threw himself at us, but we bayoneted him. We fought him off. Later I got a medal for this deed. The old man sighed sorrowfully. We, my man, on the Balkans crossed the rivers, and you now on your native land swim across, but all in the opposite direction. It's not right. I spread my hands in embarrassment. The old man softens. Well, come on, dear man. Let's have a little Nizdayemko. You have a long way to go, and I have 10 versts of soursop to swallow. The old man eats slowly. Bringing the spoon to his mouth, he tries not to spill a single drop on the grass. Under the spoon, he holds a slice of loose German bread. After swallowing a couple of spoonfuls of soup, he breaks off a piece of bread and chews it thoroughly, but suddenly spits it out and wrinkles his nose. It's not our bread, it's trashy, like grouse. After a short rest, we warmly say goodbye to the guide, feeling a sense of deep gratitude to him and pitying him. I hug him tightly by his thin shoulders. The old man excitedly waved us after. Soon the forest ends. At the edge of the night spent the night, and at dawn again on the road, we pass village after village. We go with all precautions. Before entering the village, we send a reconnaissance. We march with great exertion. The men carrying the wounded are changing every hour, and yet they are barely on their feet, but not on the third day of the grueling march. About noon, Voronov, as usual, followed in the lead patrol. On the outskirts of one of the villages, stumbled into the trenches occupied by the Red Army. The detachment was detained, and I and Voronov were brought to an elderly major. "Who are you and where are you going?" The major looked suspiciously at the German automatic rifles in our hands. We silently laid out our identity cards, my candidate card and Voronov's Komsomol card in front of him. Having carefully read them and checked the photo cards with our dusty and sunburned faces, the major apparently did not find much resemblance between them. He questioned us for a long time, where our division came to the front from, where we unloaded from the train, further actions. Then, leaving us under the supervision of armed soldiers, he went. When he returned, he declared, "We will let your detachment through if you surrender your weapons." Comrade Major, Voronov suddenly burst out. "We will not allow ourselves to be disarmed. We will still need our weapons." "You will, Lieutenant, you won't go anywhere," the major coldly parried. Noticing the sharp look thrown by the major at the German automatic rifle hanging on my pile, I realized what he was most interested in. We had few automatic rifles at that time. Every commander dreamed of getting them for his unit. We willingly used trophy ones. Having strictly asked Voronov not to interfere in the conversation of the elders, I suggest to the major to take away all the trophy weapons and ammunition from us and to keep our regular weapons. Otherwise, what else will we come to our native division with? All right. The major decisively waved his hand. You can take the rifles with you. The rest of the weapons are to be stacked here, at this dugout. When we handed over the trophies, the major gave us an order to go to the headquarters of the 19th Army and to send the artillerymen together with the cannon to Smolensk. He explained that Nazi tank and motorized divisions had stormed into Smolensk. A small force of Soviet troops who were in the Smolensk area were attacking the Nazis in an attempt to dislodge them from the northern part of the city. They are in dire need of anti-tank artillery. With regret, I bid farewell to my beloved, steadfast and imperturbable sergeant, who had travelled a difficult road with us. However, there is no harm without good. Without the gun, our small detachment has gained even greater mobility. Now it was not difficult to hitch a ride in a few hours to get to the village of Kardimuvo, where, according to the major, housed the headquarters of the 19th Army. I asked the major to help send the wounded to the hospital. The major promised to escort them to the nearest field hospital. The next morning we were in Kardimuvo. A large village near Smolensk looks lively and noisy, as during a fair. Everywhere there are cars, wagons, tethered horses, crowded people, smoking kitchens. I looked anxiously into the low cloudy sky, realizing that fascist planes could appear at any moment. Having hardly found the duty officer on the headquarters, I reported to him about my detachment and asked him to indicate the further route. A young artillery captain in a new, not yet wrinkled uniform looks not frontline fresh. Jingling his spurs, he strode briskly from the telephone to a large map laid out on smoothly hewn boards, the ends of which rested on stands made of freshly hewn thick poles. Calling me over, the captain poked a pencil at a small settlement about 4 kilometers from Vyazma. Here, Lieutenant, the assembly area of the units of the 162nd Rifle Division. Go there. I can't provide transportation. And we went. To our misfortune, there were no free hitchhikers. Lieutenant Voronov, by habit, walks a little ahead of the squad. Behind him, the 5 most enduring fighters could hardly keep up. All in all, there were 19 men left in the squad with me. My gaze with particular sadness lingers on the men of the mortar company. In addition to Voronov, from it survived 11 more people. Heavy Step, Vasil Siroshtin and Fyodor Brazhenko. After the departure of artillerymen, mortar again laid on their shoulders heavy load. Petrenko is steady, his medical bag is empty. Lisov, Polivoda, Vostrikov, Shlevko kept in a bunch. Emaciated Misha Stogov follows me unsteadily, like a shadow. Poor Komas Susik dried up for these difficult July days so that his uniform dangles on him like on a hanger. He lags behind all the time, but Fedya carefully and persistently pushes him, not allowing him to slow down. Okremenko became despondent. The food captured after the defeat of the Nazi landing in the forest glade, eaten clean. In the army headquarters could not get anything. The duty officer directed to the commandant of the headquarters, and the latter demanded a food certificate, as if sharing back to our division. We did not waste time in going to the economic instances. And now the caring petty officer, who was always painfully worried when the soldiers did not receive their rations on time, puzzled over where to feed the hungry people. His faithful assistant Fedya suggests to make a halt in the nearest village and ask the board of the collective farm to give us something to eat. We approve his proposal. When I climbed the steps of the house where the village council was located, the door opened and on the porch came 2 men with faces contorted with anger. "What do you want here?" The Toleran, with his hand wrapped in a linen towel, shouted at me. "There's nothing to rob in the village hall. Looters." I was dismayed by this reception, but restraining myself, I calmly replied that I did not understand why I deserved to be insulted. The man with the bandaged hand immediately went quiet. His comrade stepped forward. "My name is Nefedov. I am the secretary of the district party committee. A group of looters in military uniforms broke into the warehouse of the district consumer union and stole a centre of cheese. It's an extraordinary case. I can't imagine that the Red Army could do such a thing. It's clear that it's criminals in disguise." When asked where the robbers had fled, the secretary of the district committee pointed to the road leading to the... They couldn't have gone far. They tried to steal a car, but the policeman wouldn't let them. There was a keen desire to catch up with the looters by all means. Voronov and Okrymenko approved my proposal. I select 9 of the most reliable fighters and together with the secretary of the district committee, his companion, who turned out to be the chairman of the village council, and 2 policemen, we drive a semi-truck after the criminals. We did not pass 3 kilometers, as we saw a group of Red Army soldiers settled on the lawn, behind which a dark wall towered forest. The car stopped. The secretary of the district committee, with a shout of "they," jumps off the step and resolutely rushes to the lawn. On the way, I ordered Voronov to cut off the marauders' escape route to the forest, overtook the secretary of the district committee and rushed straight to the vacationers. Shout, "No, comrades, what division are you from?" Those who were sitting there grabbed their rifles. Running closer, I noticed scattered heads of cheese, bottles of vodka. 12 men in Red Army uniforms stand in wary poses around a long-legged and long-haired young man. Long strands cover his low forehead, falling over his eyes. Trying to brush them off his forehead, he jerks his head nervously and shouts, "What do you want? What do you want?" I silently continue walking. "Stop, we'll shoot," he shrieks hysterically and commands. "Get ready." I'm trembling with rage and have no idea what I'm going to do, but nothing could stop. Neither the clicking of the bolts of the rifles nor the revolver aimed at my chest. The long-haired man shouts threats with visible confusion, but some unknown force beyond my will carries me straight toward him. When the last step is left between us, I literally suffocate from the vodka stench. "What do you want? What do you want?" he repeats hysterically, waving a revolver in front of my nose. And such disgust seizes me that, without thinking of the consequences, I strike the revolver with all my might. A shot rang out, the bullet whizzed over my head, and the drunken man fell backward with a shriek. I fell on him, losing my helmet from my head, and at the same time losing consciousness from a blunt blow on the back of my head. I woke up from burning warm alcohol, which they tried to pour into my mouth. It was the caring Petrenko spending the rest of his medical supplies on me. "Alive," smiles the secretary of the district committee squatting beside me. "Thank you, Lieutenant, for your help. Can you walk, or can you carry me to the car?" I get up silently. My head is buzzing. It's impossible to put on neither a cap nor a helmet. So many white strips from a shirt on my poor head the Sen instructor twisted. It turned out that I had been treated with a rifle butt and blood was still oozing from a deep abrasion on the back of my head. After stomping around and making sure that I could walk, I headed for the car. I passed the disarmed looters, who were huddled together. Okrymenko was saying something angrily to them. From the explanations of the secretary of the district committee, the picture of what had happened became clear. While all the attention of the drunken company was directed at me, Voronov and his men cut off the way to the forest. And at the moment when the marauders huddled around me, the soldiers surrounded them, and Voronov, having fired a warning shot with his metallic, ringing voice, shouted, "Drop your weapons, traitors!" All at once turned toward him, and some big fellow fired at the lieutenant. Fortunately, the bullet, sent by a drunken hand, passed over Voronov's head. Voronov killed the bandit with an accurate shot, and the others, instantly sobering up, dropped their rifles. The first flight of policemen took away the arrested men. The secretary of the district committee and the chairman of the village council left with them. Then a semi-truck brought me, and the fighters straight to a hearty lunch. After lunch, the secretary of the district committee offers to take me to Izdeshkovo station, where, according to him, there is a military hospital. I resolutely refused, saying that I would go with my men to the division. Then he called a truck from the town of Safanov and instructed the chauffeur to take the detachment to Vyazma. We were so tired that we sat down in the car, silently waved to our hospitable hosts and immediately fell asleep. 4 hours later, we arrived at the point near Vyazma. We found the headquarters without difficulty, because everywhere there were arrow pointers to the assembly. To the entrance to the building where the headquarters was located, I encountered a thin and very agile blue-eyed major. After listening to me and looking carefully at our squad, he suggested that I follow him. We entered a spacious, bright room. On the right, at the window, a captain and a lieutenant were leaning over a map spread out on the table. Like a tiger in a cage, a colonel of about 45 was scurrying around the room, reaching the wall. He practiced movement, as in drill, turns around and quickly steps to the opposite wall, explaining something on the move, attentively listening to his lieutenant colonel, battalion commissar, Intendant second rank and major artilleryman, not paying attention to the entrance. The colonel continues to speak. A significant part of the fighters come to the assembly area without weapons. In short, not soon we will be able to form a fully combat-ready unit. See, Comrade Colonel, the replenishment has arrived, 19 men and all with weapons. The lieutenant brought them. Major pushes me forward. I come up to the colonel and introduce myself. The colonel asks in detail about the battalion, about Captain Tonkonoshenko, makes me repeat the story of the battle in which the company was cut off from the battalion. When the colonel asked me what route Captain Tonkonoshenko intended to follow, I named several settlements and an assembly area in the forest north of Lake Caspar, where later the battalion was not found. I understood from the questioning that our battalion had not arrived yet, and the colonel knew nothing about its fate, having received an answer to all my questions. Well, show your eagles. Nas headed swiftly for the exit. The rest of the colonel's interlocutors came out after us. Seeing the superiors, Voronov gave the command attention, alignment to the middle, and became on the right flank, putting his hand to his helmet. The colonel, stepping into the middle, loudly saluted. "Hello, comrades." Hearing the friendly and cheerful response. "Hello," he smiles, and having given the command at ease, slowly walks around the formation, looking intently into the faces of soldiers and commanders. Knowing from me about Voronov's exploits, the colonel, approaching him, asks, "Voronov?" "That's right. Comrade Colonel Voronov." The lieutenant, as always, is unperturbed. The colonel extends his hand. For the first time I notice a blush of embarrassment on the face of my imperturbable platoon leader. "A petty officer, Comrade Okrymenko," reports our brave Nikolai Fedorovich, sticking out his chest with a wheel. From embarrassment he called himself in the third person. See, the colonel, looking over the large figure of the petty officer, affectionately patted him on the shoulder with the palm of his hand. "Are the wounds serious?" the colonel asked, coming up to Siroshton. "Not serious at all, Comrade Colonel," Vasil dismissively waved away. "Just scratches." "Chicks, feed them immediately," orders the colonel to the intendant. "All the wounded to be carefully examined in the infirmary and, if necessary, to be sent for treatment. Laird, Lieutenant, your company, make yourselves comfortable. The commandant of the headquarters will show you the place." I commanded right, and, following the instructions of the lieutenant, who before this saw in the room behind the map, lead his unit to the commandant of the headquarters. On the way I ask who is the colonel who talked to us. "Deputy Division Commander Colonel Birch," reluctantly answers the lieutenant, with all his appearance showing that he does not intend to enter into conversation with a casual acquaintance. Silently they walked to the commandant's company, and separated just as silently. The commandant of the headquarters, a tall, gaunt senior lieutenant, led us to the other end of the street and pointed to a large wooden house with 5 windows. "Place yourselves here. You'll get your rations from the commandant's company commander-in-chief." A young woman greets me and Okrymenko in the hay. "Mother, we have Red Army soldiers coming to stay with us." She shouts, opening the door. We enter the room. A large, thin old woman sits on a wooden bench by the table and sifts through buckwheat groats. The little boy, clinging to the folds of her wide skirt, looks at us curiously. "Hello!" The hostess answers our greeting affectionately. "Come in, little falcons, come into the hut. How many of you will be?" 19, Mum. We have 19 eaters," Okrymenko answers cheerfully. "So where will we accommodate all of you falcons? The old woman is frightened. Even half of you won't fit in here." I reassure the old mistress by saying that, with her permission, we will sleep in the barn. This option apparently suited the old woman quite well. She raked the groats from the table and fussed, ordering the young woman to bring milk from the cellar to treat the falcons. Having drunk a mug of milk and bread, we began to settle down for the night, and Okrymenko hurried to the commandant's company for food. Having dragged freshly cut grass into the barn, for the first time during the days of wandering, we arranged for ourselves a comparatively cozy bed for the night. Okrymenko brought 20 loaves of puffy white bread. Each loaf was cut in 2, and a large piece of butter was placed in the middle. When I saw the butter, I decided to try to take off my chrome boots. Previously, all attempts to do this difficult operation were unsuccessful. The thin chrome from water, dirt and sun was so stuck to the skin that it could be removed only by cutting the shanks and heads from top to bottom, and I wanted to keep the boots. Under the surprised looks of the soldiers, I generously smeared the boots with rapidly melting oil. Voronov looks at my work with interest. Having finished the job and washed my hands, I began to eat white bread with appetite, drinking it with well water. Sighing heavily, Voronov also rubs oil on his boots. 2 or 3 hours later, the procedure of pulling the boots off me and Voronov began. I do not know what Sergei felt, who did not utter a word, while his feet were pulled off the dried boots, but it seemed to me as if the skin was being torn off my feet along with the boots. I struggled to keep from screaming when Okremenko, like pincers, grasped the back of the boots with his strong hands. By the copious streams of sweat on his forehead, he guessed what unbearable pain he was inflicting on me, and from that he himself was covered with sweat. At last the boots were thrown off. Penko, examining his left foot, turned potent sock had decayed and its pieces were glued to the bloody calluses. I was ashamed that I had forgotten about the elementary measures of hiking hygiene which we were persistently taught in the school. This incident served me a good lesson. Petrenko spent at least an hour cleaning the bloody calluses from the remnants of socks and treating the wounds with alcohol. Gritting my teeth, I patiently endured the exaction. The petty officer somewhere got an old galocha, in which I can hardly squeeze my bandaged foot, so I walk like this, one foot in a chrome boot, the other in a galocha. Luckily for me, there are many soldiers and commanders so exotically clothed. Some went without boots for the same reason as I did, others because of a wound, others had their boots sprawled out during long passages and had to put on what was at hand. Rubber slippers, soldiers' boots, galoches. For 2 days people regained their combat appearance. The soldiers took a bath in the bathhouse, shaved, washed their uniforms. In the commandant's company, a petty officer got thread and needles and made everyone carefully darn their uniforms, pants, underwear. During the days of rest, I more and more often with sadness remember our soulful and energetic Stadniuk. It is hard to accept the thought that he is no longer alive. It seemed that now he would appear with a stack of fresh newspapers and say, "Comrades, there is good news." Now I and party leader Lysov hold daily informations. We tell about the situation at the fronts, about the growing repulse, which meets the aggressor. Fresh issues of the army newspaper for the honor of the motherland. The new soldiers read them to holes. The newspaper published sinister revelations of fascist bosses. They aroused people's unbounded hatred for the aggressor. Sometimes I do not recognize my comrades when I read them excerpts from the notorious Rosenberg's book, The Myth of the 20th Century, in which he, in particular, wrote, "In the great struggle for existence, honor, freedom, and bread, which is led by such a creative nation as the German, it is unacceptable to reckon with Poles, Czechs, Russians, and similar nations, as impotent and insignificant, as demanding and insolent. These nations must be pushed eastward in order to free the lands to be cultivated by German hands." And Kremenko hit upon the obscure epithet impotent. When I explained the meaning of this word, he threatened with his fist. "We themselves, fascist bastards, will soon make them impotent." We deployed a lot of propaganda work in connection with the publication of the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on responsibility for the spread of false rumors. Lisov, familiarizing the fighters with the decree, said that the enemy specifically sends its agents to spread panic rumors, wanting to undermine the morale of Soviet soldiers. Calling his comrades to resolutely fight against rumor spreaders, he read a popular poem by Nikolai Assi. "Fear has not great eyes, but hands. Don't indulge in a shaky fantasy. If you hear someone lying, shut his mouth with a hat." The results of the explanatory work did not slow down. The fighters began to bring to me frightened amateurs who liked to share the news. As a rule, they were from neighboring units. Just had time to send to the headquarters of one panicker, in Kopf told that the German tanks are already advancing on Moscow, as Siroshtan drags by the scruff of the neck stubborn, disheveled Red Army soldier. Siroshtan stretched out, and putting his hand to his helmet, indignantly reported, "My comrade lieutenant, listen to what this bastard is saying." I took a glimpse of the loose, unkempt figure of the détenu. I stare intently into his frighteningly running whitish eyes, as if covered with eye shades. I, too, would like to hear the news you are spreading, as well as to know from what source you draw it. The informer stares intently at the toes of his shoes. Repeating the question, the detainee remains stubbornly silent. Large drops of sweat dripping from his forehead accumulate on the tip of his potato-shaped nose. Running out of patience, I say angrily, Bring this scoundrel to headquarters, Vasile. Report what rumors he's spreading. The Red Army soldier, perking up, casts a quick angry glance at Saroshtin and cries out tearful. No, I'm not lying. He's making it all up. You asshole. Sergeant swings at him, causing him to crouch down in fright. And who has just told our soldiers that all our commanders are traitors, that you viper, personally shot 3 colonels, several captains and lieutenants during the retreat? Ask our soldiers, comrade lieutenant. Mr. Rushton turns to me, his face crimson with anger. Did you really say all this? I ask, extremely surprised by what I heard. The detainee sullenly averts his eyes to the side. I repeat the order to hand over the spreader of false rumors to the headquarters. And in the evening there was an event that confirmed the timeliness of work to increase vigilance. We sat with Voronov in the hut at the table, just had time to swallow a spoonful of buckwheat porridge with milk, which we were treated by caring hostesses, as the door suddenly swings open and into the room quickly enters an unfamiliar infantry captain, followed by Oremenko and 2 soldiers with rifles in front of him. What happened, comrade petty officer? I ask strictly, dissatisfied with the fact that interrupted the but the captain does not let Oremenko open his mouth. How dare you, lieutenant, so dissolve the subordinates? He shouts, sputtering with rage. You'll answer for this. I demand to immediately arrest the petty officer for insulting the senior commander, otherwise you will bitterly regret what happened. Dazed from the unexpected attack, our good-natured petty officer mumbles something inarticulately, more often than usual repeating his favorite flies are eating him. Leaving the table, I approach the bewildered Oremenko, putting my hand on his shoulder. Calm down, Nikolai Fedorovich. Report clearly what happened. Orenko straightens his mighty shoulders and reports with resentment in his voice. Comrade Lieutenant, I'm sorry, but the boys detained them. The petty officer nodded towards the captain. They, eat them flies, went around the village and collected letters from the boys. Such a letter carrier seemed suspicious to us. Since the petty officer nodded at the captain again. The Yas were in our location. I asked to see their documents. They refused and called me a fool. It's a shame, comrade lieutenant, we were acting under orders. Stop the buffoonery, lieutenant, the detainee interrupted wryly. Your Sherlock Holmeses have obviously overdone it, but considering the alarming situation, I forgive them. And I advise you to take measures to prevent such foolishness from happening again. So the detainee's tone, the way he spoke, got on my nerves. And most importantly, this self-appointed letter carrier seemed suspicious. When I approached him, I introduced myself and asked him to show me his documents, arrogantly looking at me. The captain leisurely pulls out a waterproof case from the pocket of his woolen overcoat, pulls out some document and with a contemptuous grin holds it out to me. Your subordinates, Lieutenant, have been overdoing it. I wanted to help them send letters to their relatives as I am now leaving for Vyazma, and your soldiers arrested me instead of thanking me. That's stupid, Lieutenant. I hope, comrade captain. The soldiers weren't rude to you? No, the captain waved his hand condescendingly. They just overdid it, I forgive them. That's good, I concluded. We will now check your papers, and that will be the end of the formalities. Sir Captain's eyes narrowed with anger, but he continued to look at me with a condescending grin. Having opened the document handed out to me, I am convinced that it is almost a brand new party card, issued in the name of Ivan Vasilievich Konkov. I was surprised that the captain presented not an identity card, but a party card, but he explained that he had handed the card to the headquarters for replacement, because it was spoiled during the crossing of the Dnieper. I looked carefully at the party card. Everything was in order, however. The photo is alarming. The party card was issued in 1935, and in the photo the captain looked the same as I saw him before me. Even the uniform was the same. Intercepting Voronov's wary look, I politely apologized for the delay and, referring to the order, asked the captain to follow me to the headquarters. A vague suspicion does not leave me, but for some reason I hesitate to show open distrust of the senior officer. Therefore arrogantly waved his hand Oremen. Stay, say, I'll go alone. And this arrogance almost cost me my life. We are walking with the captain almost side by side. I am wary, ready to take my revolver out of my holster at any second, but I had completely forgotten that the holster must be unbuttoned. This circumstance apparently did not go unnoticed by my companion. and when we turned into a blind alley leading to the headquarters, he leapt cat-like to the side. In his hand gleamed matted TT. I am clearly aware that it is impossible to miss at such a distance, and, snatching the weapon, I hope only that I will be able to shoot before the revolver falls out of my hands, but I did not have time to pull the trigger. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. The bullet whizzed by my head, and the captain, grasping his hand with a groan, dropped the gun. I turned around and saw Sergei Voronov, who had appeared from nowhere. Picking up the gun, he mockingly sneers through his teeth, looking at the captain point blank. You were taught to shoot badly. You viper, you take a long time to aim. How did you get here, Sergei? You forbade Okremenko to follow you, not me. Voronov smiles slyly and, frowning, adds, For some reason I didn't like the look he threw at the buckled holster. Realizing that only by a miracle escaped death, I feel a great sense of gratitude to his saviour. However, at the front we quickly get used to restraint. Coming up to Voronov and shaking his strong hand, I say only one word. Thank you. It's not worth it. We took the captain to the headquarters, reported what had happened. At the first hour of the night I was called to the special department. Major, rubbing tired eyes, asked me to elaborate on why the captain aroused our suspicions. I explained. Having listened carefully, the Major smiled. Well done, and your fighters and you, Lieutenant, acted correctly. Congratulations, Captain Fake. Abwefer instructed him to collect information about the reserves in the near rear. I'm listening to the Major and thinking about what a cautionary lesson fate has taught me. Perhaps you'd like to join us, the Major suddenly suggested. You see the situation in the front line? We really need vigilant people. Thanking for the trust, I replied that I felt more prepared to meet the Nazis in open combat. Too bad, Lieutenant. The Major extends his hand to me. I still ask you to think about the proposal. Tomorrow report your decision. However, I did not have to think about it. In the morning, Voronov and I were summoned to Colonel Birch. Meeting with him waited unfamiliar to me commanders and political workers. We greeted those gathered. I wanted to ask a nearby lieutenant about the reason for the call, but at that moment the duty officer invited everyone to the colonel. When we entered the spacious room, the deputy commander of the 162nd Rifle Division, Colonel Birch, nervously paced around the room. The duty officer reported that all the summoned commanders had arrived. Tried looking at us, the colonel announced. Say, comrades commanders, in the vicinity of the city of Yartsevo are fierce fighting with airborne paratroopers thrown there. For their elimination is not enough forces, so the commander of the 19th Army ordered to allocate to fight the landing party all those who can act immediately. We are forming a composite battalion counterintuition. Pulling out of the pocket of the jacket sheet of paper, he read out the order on the appointment of command and political staff of the composite battalion. The battalion was headed by Senior Lieutenant Gryazev. The commissar was appointed Senior Political Officer Stepchenko, who reminded me something of the battalion commissar Panchenko. The adjutant senior, or simply put, Chief of Staff, was Lieutenant Vasiliev. The second senior lieutenant, dressed in a baggy-fit cotton gymnasier and exorbitantly wide blue gallifet, became commander of the second company. I had the share to command the first company, Voronov the third. After reading the order, the colonel began to familiarize himself with each of the appointed commanders. Reaching me and noticing on my left foot galoshes, the colonel was surprised. Are you, Lieutenant, in this form going to battle? No. I answered and felt that the colour of shame rushed to my face. I'll wear a boot. Mazzy, can you? In the colonel's voice you can hear distrust. I can. I will. Leaving Colonel Birch, the commander gathered all the commanders and political workers under the awning of the farmyard, looked around the gathered a quick, scrutinizing look of brown eyes. For a long acquaintance, no time, he said. We shall recognize each other in battle. Today until 1500, take the men on the lists as well as receive weapons and equipment. Ready to go 1800. Any question? Questions, of course. There were many. Combat patiently answered them. In conclusion, the commissar of the battalion recommended that before the performance on the campaign necessarily hold a short party and komsomol meetings in the units. When they began to disperse, he handed everyone a pack of issues of the army newspaper and Pravda, which we had not received since the beginning of the war. Without wasting time, I headed for the houses where the first company was housed. A camp kitchen was smoking near one of them. Having found out from a Red Army man who was fiddling near the furnace that the company commander was in the house, I slowly went up to the porch. The door swiftly opened, and in its opening appeared a tall, thin senior lieutenant. After pulling on his new cotton uniform and correcting the slipping waist belt, he politely inquired, "Who are you here to see, Comrade Lieutenant?" Having learned that I was appointed commander of the 1st Rifle Company, he, trying to broaden his narrow shoulders, introduced himself. Senior Lieutenant Panchenko, commanding the 3rd Platoon, and as senior in rank, temporarily acting as commander of the company. Sighing with relief, he added, "Please accept the company. I have a platoon full of troubles. I'm a teacher of Russian language and literature by profession. I'm used to dealing with children, not with large-aged varmints. Just now, the Red Army soldiers did something like this. They took out of the barn the owner's pig, glued to it long bangs of black-painted soot, drew charcoal mustaches on the forehead swastika, and in this form dragged the poor pig to the improvised tribune. The whole company sat down in front of the tribune, and Red Army man Kocharigin began to pull the pig's tail. She, of course, indignantly grunted, then squealed, and the audience, listening to the snide comments of Red Army Yelkin, laughing furiously and applauding wildly. She reminded them very vividly of the caricature of Hitler they had received yesterday. The owner, hearing the desperate squealing of the pig, ran out of the house and raised such a scream. She was offended that her animal had been likened to Hitler. I could barely persuade her not to go to the headquarters with a complaint. For a long time I explained to her what an important propaganda role her pet had played. Papchenko invites me into the house. We enter. A tall, broad-boned old woman, dressed in a black blouse and a skirt with numerous folds, is heating a huge stove. She does not answer my polite "hello, mistress," and silently continues her fiddling at the stove. Still angry, whispers Panchenko and points to the door leading to the second half of the house. "Come in there, we are accommodated." We enter a clean, bright room, in the corner of which stands a high bed with a mountain of down pillows. The floor is covered with homespun doormats, and by the window is a table covered with an embroidered tablecloth. "Here," said Papchenko, nodding at the floor on the opposite wall. "We, commanders, sleep here. If you object, we'll split up into platoons." Having said that together cheerful, I ask to show the list of personnel of the company. Papchenko pulls out of the field bag notebook and, opening, gives me. Sitting down at the table, I study the list, which gave a complete picture of the age of fighters and commanders, their military specialty, the presence of their combat experience. From now on, under my command, will be more than 125 soldiers and commanders, which is 2.5 times more than I had to command in the first weeks of the war. Consequently, the responsibility will increase. 125 soldiers and commanders, a lot of power, and if my new comrades in arms will be as well prepared as mortars, we will still show the Nazis where the crayfish winter. The age of soldiers and commanders ranged from 20 to 30 years old. The most elderly was Papchenko, who was 34 years old. The rest of the platoon commanders were my age. The company's political commander was Stolnikov, whom I had not yet had the opportunity to meet. When asked about the equipment of the company, Papchenko answered without enthusiasm. There were not even enough rifles, and of automatic weapons there was only one handheld machine gun. There were no sapper shovels, no gas masks, no company mortars. All these things had to be obtained, and there was no time. Any minute they could raise the other. Without delaying a minute, I hurry with a list of missing weapons and equipment to the commander. He meets me in a close circle of commanders. From the very lively negotiations, I realized that all the commanders came with similar requests. In all companies, there is a shortage of the most necessary for the battle. Combat reports that he filed a report to headquarters about the lack of weapons and poor equipment battalion. It remains to wait for the decision of Colonel Birch. So approaching the house where the commanders settled, I saw the Red Army lined up in 2 rows. Noticing me, Papchenko shouted excitedly, "Ye please, equal a yes," humble, and slowly, goose-like, not bending his legs, approaching me. "Comrade Company Commander, the 1st Rifle Company is built up with 118 soldiers and commanders. The rest are on duty," and Senior Lieutenant Papchenko reports. I command, "At ease." Papchenko repeats and again adds, "Please." Going around the platoon ranks, scrutinizing the faces of soldiers, together with whom, perhaps in a few hours to go into battle, I look at them and think, All of them are already scorched by the gunpowder of war. Did the retreat brought confusion in their souls? I meet with direct, firm gazes. In their eyes I notice neither fear nor depression, and I calm down. Your last name, comrade? I ask the blue-eyed Red Army soldier, whose face is frozen with a cheerful grin. Red Army man Sechin. Pulling himself up, the fighter chastises me with a ringing voice. Do you participate in the battles? That's right, and embarrassed added. Mostly retreating. Nothing. I calmed down, looking at the fighter with pleasure, whose slender figure stood out with freshly washed uniforms and clean, shining from tar boots. You, for a beaten man, you get 2 unbeaten men. We shall learn to advance. Frowning, the Red Army soldier quietly, as if sharing a secret, exhaled. I believe in it, comrade commander. Sight of several fighters is irritating, through the torn uniforms, grey dirty underwear, boots in dried mud, and the expression of their faces, on one hopeless longing, on the other frozen fear. These people have not yet recovered from the shock experienced in the battles. Ordered to take the company to its designated homes, I ask platoon commanders to stay to get to know them better. The commanders of the 1st and 2nd platoons, Lieutenant and Valeshnikov, are similar brave look, excellent military alignment and some elusive grace, usually inherent in good gymnasts. On their handsome figures, even soaked and dusty gymnasts look beautiful. At my request to briefly tell about myself, Kalinin, having spread his powerful wrestling shoulders, with a subtle good-natured grin bounces. I was born in 1921 in a village near Ryazan, graduated from an incomplete secondary school and few. District Komsomol Committee sent to the Military Infantry School, released in June 41st, and on July 11, as part of the 501st Infantry Regiment, arrived at the front near Vitebsk. A week ago I came out of the encirclement. That's all my biography. Hoping to get any information about the fate of our 720th Rifle Regiment, I asked Lieutenant Kalinin to tell more about the battles near Vitebsk, but he reported a little. The regiment boldly attacked and chased the fascist infantry, but the next day, under the onslaught of tanks, was forced to withdraw. During the battle, the company, which included Lieutenant Kalinin's platoon, was cut off and pressed to the river. Soldiers and commanders fought to the last cartridge. Those who survived tried to swim across the river under heavy enemy fire. Only Lieutenant Kalinin and 5 Red Army men of his platoon managed to reach the opposite bank. About the 720th Infantry Regiment he knew nothing. From Lieutenant Valeshnikov, words had to pull out, like nails pincers. He speaks slowly, thinking about each word. Where did you study, Comrade Valeshnikov? At the Kiev Infantry School. When did you graduate? In June of the 41st. Were you in combat? I did. What unit did you command? Nichus. Rifle platoon? During the conversation, political officer Vadim Nikolaevich Stolnikov came up and threw questions at the lieutenants. When Valeshnikov could not recall the name of one of the communists, Stolnikov's tanned, handsome face darkened. Oh, how could it be so? After all, the communists and Komsomol members are the backbone in the battle. You should know each of them as yourself. When Stolnikov ran out of questions, I briefly tell about myself. Then it's the political officer's turn. He, as if apologizing, said that he had not yet participated in the battles. I graduated from the military political school in 1940. He worked in the political department of a rifle division. The conversation is interrupted by the sudden appearance of my mortarmen, who were brought by Petty Officer Okremenko. At his command, they rearranged themselves into a single line and emphasized youthfully stretched out under the surprised looks of commanders. So, Comrade Komroti, the personnel assured to you has arrived to receive instructions, shouted Okremenko, approaching me with a regimented step, smoothing his wheat mustache with both hands. He looked at me point-blank with unblinking light blue eyes, in which glowed anxious expectation. I was confused. I was ashamed to confess that I had forgotten about my faithful battle buddies in the midst of all the things that had befallen me since I had been summoned to Colonel Birch's office. While I gather my thoughts, the commanders looked at the fighters with interest. Silence dragged on, and Okremenko, excitedly coughing into his fist, explained. My lieutenant from headquarters, Eat His Flies, said that all of us be. Petty officer waved his hand at the attentively listening mortar men, transferred to the reserve. And you another company take us to you. See, a wave of gratitude swept over my heart. I approached the mortars and looked fondly at their excited faces. Sidor Petrenko, who was standing right flanking, is absent-mindedly going through the strap of a sanitary bag. Having met with the reproachful look of the sanitary instructor, I turned my eyes to Senior Sergeant Stepan Polivoda, in whose grey, tired eyes I read, "You can't abandon your comrades in arms, Lieutenant." His neighbour Vostryakov puffs up his already puffy cheeks resentfully. Fyodor Brachenko stretched at the seams unusually long arms, sniffing duck nose. Swarthy face Lysov, on which hard particles of coal dust left indelible traces, as always, calm, and his eyes as if to say, "Well, where are you without us, Commander?" On the round, snub-nosed face of the tall, narrow-shouldered Shlevko is calm and good-natured, seeing in the ranks of the former teacher Pavel Mitin from the rifle rows, with the remnants of which, in the last battles united the surviving mortars, sincerely rejoiced. He is the only one of the riflemen who remained with the mortars. Meeting his gaze, I smile at him in a friendly manner. I definitely like this intelligent man who did not lose his composure in the most difficult moments of the battle situation. But I am especially happy about the prospect of getting a fighter in the company who can speak German. My faithful orderly Misha Stogov expresses his resentment, drilling an angry look at the ground beneath his feet. Only little Koma Susik, putting his skinny hands on his invariable field telephone, looks at me with a childishly open smile. The ridiculous clothes of Fedya, who stood last, involuntarily makes me smile. He is wearing homemade striped pants, tucked into ineptly twisted windings and huge soldier's boots. His broad shoulders are encased in a soldier's uniform with cavalry buttonholes. It is obviously too small for this rich man. His large hands stick out ridiculously from the short sleeves. The collar is not buttoned. It seemed that Fedya was afraid to inhale a full breath. It was possible that his uniform would come apart at the seams, and on his head he still wears a homemade cartouche made of brown cloth. Only above the visor a red star is shining. In this form, Fedya looks like a Civil War anarchist, as they are often shown in movies. "Who dressed you up like that?" I wondered. "I did it myself," Fedya replies haughtily. "Comrade Okremenko." I try to speak as sternly as possible. "Why hasn't Fedya been transferred to the headquarters?" "They won't take him. The flies are eating him. They told him to go to Vyazma and apply to the military enlistment office there. Those bureaucrats," the good-hearted petty officer angrily waved his hands. "I'm looking in vain for Sergeant Seroshnin. He's not here." As if anticipating my question, Okremenko sadly informs me. "And Vasil was taken away to the infirmary." Having once again carefully looked at my comrades, I sigh deeply, involuntarily recollecting in my memory a short but difficult and dangerous path travelled together with them. I cannot accept the idea that I will have to go into battle without my tried and tested combat friends. I will not part with them, by all means to achieve that they were included in my new company. When I told about the trials that fell to our share, Stolnikov hotly exclaimed, "I'm with you, Commander. I will go to beg the commander to include these young men in our company." Gave detailed instructions to platoon commanders on the preparation for the upcoming battles. I let them go. Remembering Papchenko's irregular manner of giving a command, I stop him and say that the word "please" when giving a command sounds ridiculous. "Sorry, please." He replies with an embarrassed smile, force of habit. This word pops out beyond my will. The political officer and I hurry to the commander. Senior Lieutenant, having listened to our request, resolutely refuses to go to Colonel Birch, saying that he will not allow to transfer mortars to shooters. Stolnikov reasonably objects that among the men of our composite company there are even sappers and artillerymen. After much persuasion, the commander gives up and promises to solve this issue. Considering the inclusion of mortar men in the company matter resolved, Okremenko developed a flurry of organizational activity, completely pushing the staid Sergeant Vostokov from the duties of company foreman. The latter obediently follows the energetic Ukrainian and unconditionally agrees with his orders. Soon the economical Okremenko got 3 thermoses filled with gasoline, heaped various glass containers, and organized the production of homemade anti-tank mines. Having learned that the commandant's company foreman was also Ukrainian, Okremenko visited him and soon brought a pile of various worn-out uniforms, which came in very handy. Fede's uniform and pants were matched to his height, only there was no cap for him. Instead of a cap, Okremenko put a huge helmet on his head, in which Fedya looked like an experienced soldier. In the rush of preparations, we completely forgot that the fate of mortars is not yet known. Therefore, the appearance of a messenger who passed the order to me and the political officer to come to the commander caused anxiety. What if the refusal? How will I announce it to my battle buddies? Chasing away anxious thoughts, I almost ran to the house where the commander was stationed. Stolnikov barely keeps up with me. Having fallen into the hut, I silently call and stretch out in anticipation. Combat, apparently realizing the reason for my excitement, with a smile announces, "Lieutenant, all mortars remain in your company. The colonel has granted the petition." Only mortars flashes in my mind, and Mitin and Fedya. After all, about them I forgot to report to the commander. When I told about Mitin, the commander waved his hand decisively. One more, one less. What difference? After some thought, the commander allowed to leave and Fedya, ordering to enroll in the list of the company with the exact address of relatives. Little or nothing can happen in battle, he explained. We can't let his relatives not know about his fate. As soon as we complete the task and return to the division, we will submit the necessary information about him to the headquarters. I returned to the company. I am glad that to meet new challenges will go shoulder to shoulder with proven battle buddies. My message on the agreement of Colonel Bircher to enroll mortars in the composite battalion, they met with jubilation. Meanwhile, it got dark outside. The night silence is occasionally broken by the shouts of sentries. We should at least get some sleep. Having made sure that the missing weapons were received and distributed, that the company was provided with ammunition, that people were fed, I announced stand down.